This is the lecture about HOD, the Mercury-ᚢᚉᚷ, the 8th ᚢᚉᚷ, 8th from the top down, and this is called Splendour. And in the Yetzirah text, which I haven't really mentioned before, it is called the perfect intelligence. The sphere of HOD is usually described as sort of almost an inferior sphere. It's not dealt with a lot of deference. It's not, or reverence. It's not dealt with fearfully. So it's just usually described as the rational mind. Like, first you have Malchut, the physical body, then you have Yesod, the water, the emotions, and the menstruation and whatnot. Then you have HOD, the rational mind, and then you have Netzach, and then they already get confused. It's like, well, maybe it's the instincts, or maybe it's the artistic stuff, or the creative, yeah. And then it's meaningless. But as you've noticed, I've been treating the whole thing from the top down, which is obviously how it's built, since the one is the Keter. It's the creation process. So when you get all the way down from HOD is a really advanced stage of creation, and it is true that it relates to the rational mind, to the property of discernment. Now, that is not a small thing. Let us consider the path that leads down from Tiferet, this is the central sphere, down to HOD. This is the devil. And the tarot card is the devil. The letter is the Ayin. But the devil card. Okay, why is there even... I was recently involved, or just, I sort of got a little bit involved in a discussion on God and sin, and why did sin included in the creation, was the fact that they ate from the apple, from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Was this, part of God's plan and everything? And I said, well, or I didn't say, but I was figuring, well, he gave a pretty tantalizing description of the tree. He pointed it out to them, and then he gave them an eternity of opportunity to eat from them. So one might say, yes, it was part of the plan, but they had to do it of their own free will. He couldn't command them to do it, then it wouldn't work. So you could say this path from Tiferet to HOD is the path of free will, and all of the whole price that comes with it. Now, knowledge of good and evil simply came to Adam and Eve in the form of being punished. Just simply, just like it comes to a child when he's smacked. He realized, oh, there's apparently something, a judgment, some kind of judgment. I'm being judged for whether I do this or this. That's what knowledge of good and evil amounts to, apparently, in this first phase. Just the dawning awareness of that there is something like judgment and discernment between one thing and the other. And that is what HOD very much represents, and what the Mercury's what Mercury represents is the discernment, the ability to separate things from each other. And there we get to the core of what HOD is, separation, which means a lot of pain. HOD is the place where separation itself becomes a thing, where the perspective actually is broken. This is what happens when you fuck a stranger in the ass. HOD is a place of a lot of consequence. It is the place where the Godhead lets go, in a sense, where creation has gathered enough momentum in Netzach for the mind that is represented in Keter to sort of let go of the reins, you know, let the chips fall where they may. Everything by that point has been developed to such an extent, or the whole process has been developed, the consciousness has been developed through Netzach up to such a point that the whole thing is valuable. In HOD, the whole thing is splintered so that it's kind of a rain of diamonds in a sense. And everything starts to relate on its own accord. So true individuality is born there in HOD. And from this individuality, actual physicality can be born. Matter works foremost by being separate entities. This is how it is plastic. This is how you can handle it. This is how it can change, essentially. Everything up to HOD cannot change. It just is what it is. In HOD, every particle is given its own agency. So the sphere of HOD as a whole relates to all these particles that all have their own agency and to the contradictions between them. So it relates very strongly to magic. How do I fucking say that? Because of the inherent separateness and thus the inclusion of wickedness in HOD, it is no longer possible here to just defer to the authority upstairs, even though it is very wise if you're practicing magic to include the authority or the source upstairs in your magic. Wise, at least, you know, depending on your purposes, but unless you want to screw up your whole world, or ready to. And this is what, incidentally, what happens to people. They just apply a magical formula here and somewhere there, and then this and then that. But then the cascading butterfly effect of all these actions that trigger new things that you had no idea existed and will probably never know exist, but that will still work on you because you activated one thing that connected to another thing, and etc. So you get a whole fucking disaster raining down on you, and it might last you your whole life, which may be very short if you practice magic in this way. You have to isolate things. You have to pay the price of the fucking ceiling. So you pay the price of being limited, and once you pay this price, when you've like paid for it, once you've isolated yourself and knelt, or been humble, like made yourself acknowledge the modesty you have to have, you can do whatever you want. Make your circle and then perform your magic. And you have no authority above you. That is paradoxical, isn't it? That too fits very much to HOD, the paradox, the apparent contradiction, the contradiction which in the end is resolved in the unity of Keter. This is not easy. It's like a mushroom trip where you realize the wholeness of the thing, and because you realize the wholeness, you realize that your realization of it is the particularness of things, and then you start to speak, and then the world is too deliciously great and interconnected to be expressed, and that's the perfect intelligence. Weirdly, I must conclude that HOD is also the sphere of fear. Of course, the devil card from Tiferet, from individuality, from the fulfillment, the total Dionysian culmination of individuality, to the sphere of limitation. That is a sphere which includes tremendous fear, infinite power of fear. Now the Romans, when they encountered the runic people, they discovered that their supreme god was not the god of law and order, not the king of society, not the peak of the pyramid, not the god of law and order, but the god, as they saw it, of knavery and thievery and wandering, and a very wicked god, Odin, Wotan. And they related him to the sphere of Mercury. They were sharp, these Romans. These are the great magicians, the great inner authorities. Remains the question whether these are exactly oneself, or if they're actual magical entities, or great masters, or great deluders, or great seducers, or great guides, but there is also lurking from the future, which is Malchut, the god of the earth, the god who understands, who draws all the drops back to him, so essentially the will of the earth. And this seems to be the inner god of the sphere of HOD, which cannot be expressed, and therefore, because it cannot be expressed, the word exists, because the word is about expressing something else than the perfect, namely the limited.